Tsavo east just after sunrise. The sky had barely shifted from gray to gold when a ranger named Yusuf paused on the edge of the scrub line. He had been scanning the eastern ridge for movement, elephants perhaps, or kudu, when he noticed a figure fixed against the slope. A lone lion, standing still near the crest, head high, body taut. At first, Yusuf thought it was a posture of dominance, that familiar stillness predators hold just before a kill. But the seconds passed, then minutes, and the lion didn't shift. For nearly 20 minutes, Yusuf watched him through binoculars. The wind moved the thorn brush gently, dry leaves whispering over rock. The lion didn't blink. His tail didn't flick. His body remained locked, as if carved from the slope itself. That kind of stillness wasn't normal, especially not from a lion alone at dawn. Yusuf made a note, radioed the southern team, and stayed in the shade of the brush, waiting for some sign of movement. None came. By late morning, the light had grown harsh, and the lion still hadn't moved. Now Yusuf stood beneath the acacia, staring through the heat shimmer. He noticed something new, a slight slant in the lion's weight. His left rear leg bent unnaturally, resting more heavily into the ground. The posture wasn't pride, it was stressful, and his ribs were showing more clearly now, rising and falling slowly beneath his coat. Too slowly. Lions don't freeze unless they must. They crouch, they sit, they collapse. But this one stood like a sentry at the end of something. Yusuf moved in a little, staying low, never making noise. At 100 meters, the lion's head turned, not fast, not defensive. He looked directly at Yusuf and held his gaze. No growl, no roar, just that calm, heavy stare from behind sun-dried eyes. And still he didn't step back. He didn't step forward. That kind of trust was rare, but so was that kind of stillness. Yusuf stayed at that distance for over an hour, crouched behind low grass, water in his flask untouched. The lion blinked once, then again. The sun overhead had begun to drop, shadows shifting. A single fly circled the lion's back leg, where something now appeared matted near the upper joint. A wound, maybe. Dried blood beneath fur, but from this distance, Yusuf couldn't be sure. Only the lion's uneven stance gave it away. "If he doesn't move by nightfall," Yusuf whispered to his shoulder mic, "we'll have to assess injury." He said nothing more. The team didn't approach. They set water a safe distance away and retreated. They had seen too many animals bolt from panic, even when help was offered. But this lion didn't bolt. He didn't even flinch. He just kept looking down the hill at Yusuf, or maybe through him, as if time didn't press any more. By late afternoon, a heat shimmer warped the horizon. Dust turned to haze. The lion finally shifted, only slightly, and the movement confirmed Yusuf's suspicion. A limp, a pain that locked him into place. Whatever had happened, it had kept him on that ridge all day, exposed to sun, wind, and flies. If he moved too far, he could collapse, but if he stayed, dehydration would soon follow. The stakes were plain now. Either the lion would accept quiet help in time, or his body would give out where he stood. Yusuf took a few steps back, never breaking the line of sight. The lion didn't follow, didn't growl, didn't run. He just stood there, higher than the dust, as if holding ground not for defense, but for dignity. They returned just before dusk. The light had softened, but the heat still clung to the rocks, and the wind carried that dry scent of sunburnt grass and distant ash. Yusuf walked ahead of the others, keeping his steps deliberate, each one angled just enough to stay within the lion's gaze. The others followed silently, a slow, respectful approach. No vehicles, no noise, only cloth packs and a small water basin. From 70 meters out, the truth began to settle. The lion had not shifted since the previous day. His body, once broad with the weight of muscle, now looked hollowed. His sides drew in with each breath, ribs outlining the rise and fall like distant hills on the skin. Not an attack stance, not a territorial warning. It was something else entirely. Weakness made still. Yusuf stopped, set the basin gently on the earth, and stepped back without turning away. The lion's eyes followed him. Not wild with fear or fury, just tired, watching, like an old sentinel unsure if the shapes approaching were a threat or ghost. His tail remained motionless in the dust. His ears did not pin back. No sound came from his chest. At 50 meters they stopped again. It was close enough now to see how the front paws curled slightly, as if clenching for balance. Dust had caked between the claws. His flanks had small patches of missing fur, and one eye looked faintly swollen, likely from flies or thorns. But it was the rhythm of his breathing that said more than wounds. Each inhale was shallow, uneven, not the breath of rest, but of a body spending its last reserves just to remain upright. Still, he did not collapse. Rangers don't speak much in moments like these. The tension doesn't come from danger, but from the weight of choice. To move closer now risked triggering the instinct to flee. But if they waited too long, the lion might fall in the night, unseen, alone, and no creature, even a king, should suffer like that in silence. Yusuf reached into his pack and unwrapped a strip of goat meat. He walked 10 slow paces, laid it down, and backed away again. No response. The lion's gaze tracked him the entire time, heavy and patient, but his legs didn't twitch and his head stayed level. "He's not posturing," one of the younger rangers said quietly. "He's not warning us off." Yusuf just nodded. The truth was simple now. The lion wasn't standing to intimidate. He was standing because lying down meant not getting up again. By the time the sun dropped behind the far escarpment, the team had placed 2 more offerings nearby: water, a few soaked rags in a shallow pan, a small pile of meat covered lightly from the flies. Then they retreated beyond his sight line, leaving only a small night watch in the brush. If the lion trusted them even slightly, he might eat. If not, the night would drain him further, and if he limped rather, he wouldn't make it far. There was no drama at the moment. No growl, no thunder, just wind and stillness, and a lion too proud or too tired to fall over. His eyes remained open, locked toward the shadows where Yusuf had gone, and in that gaze there was no fury. Only the final flicker of alertness in a body near its end. The next morning, the sun had barely touched the horizon when the team returned to the ridge. The air was cooler, filled with the faint scent of earth and dry leaves stirring under the soft breeze. Yusuf moved carefully, circling the lion from the side to get a clearer view. The animal remained in the same spot, his body bent slightly toward the slope, but the heavy stillness had deepened. There was no energy left to hold posture, only a fragile balance between pain and survival. As Yusuf's gaze swept down the lion's flank, a patch of darkened fur caught his eye near the upper thigh of the left hind leg. He signaled the others quietly, and they edged closer, careful not to disturb the fragile silence. The wound was deeper than they'd expected. A jagged tear, partially hidden by tangled fur and dried blood, cut into the thick muscle. The edges were ragged, raw, and swollen with infection. The flesh around it was red and hot under the morning sun. A clear sign the body was fighting something fierce beneath the skin. Yusuf knelt a few feet away, speaking softly. "You're hurt, worse than we thought." The lion's head shifted slightly, eyes narrowing but not in threat. Just exhaustion. The breathing was shallow still, labored. His left leg bore less weight, the paw barely touching the ground. Signs pointed to days without proper rest or nourishment, a slow weakening that had gone unnoticed from afar. The team understood now why the lion had not moved. The wound had settled like a slow poison, locking him in place. Infection was spreading, seeping deeper with each passing hour. The body had no strength to heal or flee. If left untreated, the lion would weaken further, unable to stand or hunt. Death could come quietly in the night, away from the pride, unseen by all but the grass and stones. "Still, he hasn't eaten," whispered the field vet, inspecting from a distance with a hand lens. "He's surviving only on what little reserves he has. That wound is draining him." The mood among the team grew heavier. They set down a basin of water closer to the lion and carefully placed a piece of meat near his front paws. The lion lifted his head briefly, sniffed, then lowered it again, eyes closing in a brief rest. No bite came to the food. Yusuf stayed by the ridge's edge, watching quietly. The lion's breathing was slow, uneven, like a tired drumbeat fading under the strain of infection and hunger. His muscles twitched sporadically, small spasms from pain or weakness. The wound, they realized, was more than a surface injury. It was a battle being fought inside a body too weak to win on its own. They discussed their options in low tones, approaching to sedate and treat carried risks. The lion might panic, or the infection could have already spread too far. Yet, leaving him alone meant watching a slow fade with no chance of recovery. The choice was stark: intervene now or risk losing him in the wild, alone. Yusuf knelt once more, whispering softly as if to an old friend, "We'll do what we can." The lion opened his eyes, meeting Yusuf's gaze briefly. In that moment, there was no fear, only a quiet acceptance, as if the animal knew help had come, or at least that he was no longer entirely alone. The morning light grew stronger, and the ridge carried the sounds of distant birds and the soft wind over dry grass. The lion remained still, locked in a fragile fight between pain and hope, while the team prepared for the next step, aware that time was their greatest enemy. The sun climbed higher as the team set their plans into motion. They had packed a sturdy trap and a tranquilizer gun, ready to approach the lion and provide the care he so desperately needed. The air was thick with urgency. But Yusuf felt the weight of something more delicate pressing against his chest. The lion had not fled or growled since their arrival. Instead, he had remained still, watching them with those tired eyes, like a guardian too weak to rise but unwilling to surrender. The other rangers moved quietly, arranging the trap a short distance from where the lion stood. Their movements were efficient, but the tension was palpable. Yusuf watched the lion's slow breaths, counting each one, feeling the steady pulse of a life hanging by a thread. Something told him that force might shatter the fragile trust growing between them. Without a word, Yusuf stepped away from the group and lowered himself to the ground within the lion's line of sight. He sat cross-legged on the dry earth, careful not to make sudden movements. His hands rested loosely on his knees as he breathed slowly, matching the rhythm of the wind through the thorn trees. Around him, the world kept moving, birds calling softly, insects stirring in the grass, but he held his place, still and calm. The lion's gaze shifted to Yusuf, the only figure sitting calmly in the open. Their eyes met for a long moment, and the faintest flicker of something passed between them. Not fear, not challenge, but a quiet acknowledgement. Yusuf whispered softly, "It's okay, boy. We're here." His voice was low, steady, almost swallowed by the gentle rustle of leaves. The trap remained behind him. Untouched, Yusuf's choice was clear: patience over force, presence over panic. If the lion felt threatened, even by a trap, he might bolt or resist, risking collapse or injury. But if Yusuf stayed, if he offered quiet company, perhaps the lion would find enough strength to accept care on his own terms. The hours slipped by like shadows moving across the rocks. Yusuf stayed rooted, eyes never leaving the lion's form. The sun arced overhead, casting long stripes of light and shade on the golden grass. The lion shifted slightly, a slow and careful movement that caused a wince to ripple through his body. He settled back again, head lowering toward the ground but still watching. From the edge of the clearing, Yusuf saw the other rangers waiting silently, respecting his choice. The tension in the air softened as the team gave space to this unspoken conversation between man and beast. The world was quiet, save for the soft hiss of wind and the distant call of a francolin. If the lion ran now, it would be the end. His body would not carry him far. The infection was spreading. The hunger gnawed deeper with every hour. But if he stayed, if this moment of trust could hold, there was a chance. The sun dipped low, staining the sky pink and amber. Yusuf remained seated, patient and still, until the lion gave a slow, deliberate blink and lifted his head. His gaze met Yusuf's once more, steady and clear. Without moving forward or back, the lion turned his head slightly as if granting permission. In that fragile moment, the choice to stay became an offering, a promise that healing would come not with force, but with quiet understanding. Yusuf whispered again, "You're not alone." As dusk folded over the ridge, the trap remained empty, and the lion stayed where he was, watching, waiting, and no longer alone. The afternoon sun leaned low, casting long shadows across the dry grass and scattered rocks. Yusuf remained where he had settled earlier, sitting on the earth, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. Around him, the quiet deepened. The world felt hushed, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The lion had not moved. His form was still and upright, though the weight of exhaustion pressed against every muscle. His eyes stayed fixed on Yusuf's, unblinking for long stretches, then blinking slowly, deliberate, heavy, as if each blink was a small surrender to fatigue. The breeze stirred through the thorn trees, carrying the scent of dust and dry leaves, but neither man nor beast flinched. Time passed without need for words. The sun traced its arc, dipping toward the horizon, painting the sky with pale gold and soft pink. The distant call of birds grew quieter, blending with the rustle of grasses and the faint hum of insects. The slow passage of hours wrapped around Yusuf and the lion like a cloak, binding them in a fragile stillness. Yusuf's eyes never left the lion's face. The light in those tired eyes was neither defiant nor desperate, but something more subtle, a fragile calm that seemed to seep from deep within. The lion's chest rose slowly, each breath shallow, almost silent. His tail lay still in the dust, no flicks, no twitching. He seemed to be waiting for something, or someone. The quiet between them grew heavier, filled with the weight of shared time, silent understanding. Yusuf's hands rested lightly on his knees, fingers loose and relaxed. Every now and then, a faint breath escaped him, the only sign that life moved steadily in both their bodies. He whispered once, barely audible, "It's all right now." As the sun sank lower, the lion's gaze softened. A slow blink, deliberate and lingering, closed his eyes briefly. Then, ever so gently, he lowered his head toward the earth. The movement was tired, deliberate, without struggle or fear. It was as if he was laying down not just his body, but the burden of a long fight. The grass beneath his face bent softly, dust rising with the faintest sigh. For a moment, the lion rested his muzzle on the ground, eyes half closed, breathing still shallow but steady. Yusuf watched with a calm heart, knowing this moment carried meaning beyond words. It was a quiet surrender, but not defeat, an acceptance of presence, patience, and care. The sky blushed deep orange, shadows lengthening and cooling. A soft breeze picked up, stirring loose leaves and carrying with it the scent of earth and distant wood smoke. The ridge seemed to breathe with them, holding this fragile peace between man and beast. Yusuf remained still as night fell around them. The lion lay quietly, head resting on the earth, eyes closing with the slow pulse of fading light. In that gentle darkness, Trust had taken root. A quiet bond formed not in commands or force, but in stillness and shared patience. As the first stars appeared overhead, Yusuf whispered once more, "You're safe here." The words hung softly in the cooling air, carried away by the wind and held forever in the quiet look that lingered between them. Dawn broke softly over the ridge, washing the landscape in pale light that revealed every blade of dry grass and dust mote suspended in the air. The world was still quiet, save for distant bird calls and the faint rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. Yusuf arrived early, moving carefully through the scrub to where the lion had spent the night. The animal was no longer lying down but standing, frail and unsteady, yet upright. The lion's legs trembled slightly beneath him. His left hind paw, still swollen and tender from the wound, barely touched the ground as he shifted weight carefully. Each breath was shallow but steady, a fragile rhythm of life stubbornly maintained. Yusuf remained a few meters away, silent and motionless. His eyes, fixed on the creature he had watched grow weaker by the day. Nearby, a shallow basin filled with fresh water glistened in the dawn light. It was placed there by the team the evening before, a quiet offering left in hope and respect. The lion's amber eyes flicked toward the basin. Without hesitation, he began to limp slowly toward it, careful with each step, pausing often to steady himself. His movements were cautious, burdened with pain and fatigue, yet driven by an instinct stronger than suffering, the need to survive. Yusuf watched as the lion reached the basin's edge. The animal lowered his head and drank, tongue lapping the cool water in slow, deliberate strokes. Not once did his eyes leave Yusuf's presence. There was no fear, no aggression, only a silent acknowledgement. An unspoken understanding passed between two beings sharing the same space. The morning air was cool against Yusuf's skin, and the scent of earth and dry grass mingled with the fresh water's faint aroma. Around them, the park slowly awoke. Birds flitted from branch to branch, and the wind whispered softly through the leaves. Yet, in this quiet moment, it felt as though time had slowed, focused entirely on the fragile exchange between man and lion. Yusuf did not move forward. He simply stepped aside, allowing space for the lion to drink in peace. His breath was steady, calm. No words were needed here. The trust blossomed in silence. It was a fragile thing, born from patience and respect rather than force. For a long moment the lion lingered by the water, drinking deeply, as if replenishing not just his body but his will to keep going. Then, slowly, he lifted his head and looked once more toward Yusuf. His gaze held a quiet strength, an ember of resilience amidst the pain. Yusuf met his eyes without blinking. The lion's tail twitched lightly, a small, unguarded gesture. Then he turned and began to limp back toward the rocky slope, each step weighted but determined. His movement was slow, deliberate, not a race for freedom, but a careful reclaiming of life. Behind him, the water basin glistened under the rising sun, a silent witness to this fragile new beginning. Yusuf exhaled quietly, feeling the moment settle deep in his chest. If the lion walked now, there was hope. But the road ahead remained uncertain. The infection still simmered beneath the skin, and hunger gnawed relentlessly. Every step was a victory, every breath a testament to endurance. As the lion disappeared into the brush, Yusuf whispered softly, "You're almost there." The words carried no promise, only a steady resolve to walk beside this quiet fight, however long it would last. The park awoke fully around them. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of a hyena, the first light spilling over the horizon. Yet, in this soft morning, the space between man and beast was filled with something rare, a trust that began without words and grew with every step. By mid-morning, the sun hung high enough to warm the earth, but the air remained cool and still beneath scattered acacia trees. The team moved carefully, led by the field veterinarian Dr. Mwangi, whose steady hands carried the weight of responsibility. Yusuf kept close, his eyes never leaving the lion, who rested in a shaded hollow beneath a rocky outcrop. The lion's breathing was more measured now, though the faint tremble in his limbs betrayed ongoing weakness. Dr. Mwangi prepared the tranquilizer with practiced care, selecting a mild dose intended only to ease movement, not to knock the animal unconscious. The goal was clear: scan the lion's body, assess the extent of his wounds and internal health, and start treatment without causing unnecessary stress. The team knew that too much sedation could tip the balance, risking collapse. Precision was vital. A small dart flew silently through the air, striking the lion's shoulder. Within moments, his heavy eyes grew droopy, and his muscles slackened just enough for the vet to approach safely. The team moved swiftly but gently, wrapping a light sling around the lion's midsection to support him during examination. With the lion lying on his side, Dr. Mwangi worked quickly to place the portable ultrasound probe on the thick muscle near the wounded hind leg. The device hummed softly, images flickering on the screen like shadows beneath skin. The lion's breathing remained steady, slow but consistent. Blood samples were drawn carefully, placed in sterile vials, and sent to a nearby field lab. Minutes later, the results came back. A dangerous bacterial infection had taken hold in the bloodstream. The bacteria were aggressive, resistant to many antibiotics, and spreading rapidly. Without intervention, the lion's body could shut down within days. The diagnosis confirmed the urgency. The infection explained the swollen wound, the labored breathing, and the steady decline in strength. Yet the lion's spirit had persisted despite the invisible battle raging inside. Now the team faced a new challenge: how to administer treatment slowly and carefully to avoid overwhelming the animal's fragile system. Dr. Mwangi prepared a diluted antibiotic drip, attaching it to a catheter in the lion's foreleg. The flow was slow, a measured pulse of medicine to fight the infection while preserving the lion's energy. The team settled into a quiet vigil, watching for any signs of distress or collapse. Yusuf stood nearby, feeling the weight of the moment. The lion lay still but alive, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath. Trust, they realized, had carried the animal this far, but now survival depended on the team's steady care and patience. Hours stretched into the afternoon. The sun moved westward, shadows lengthening across the dusty ground. The lion's breathing grew steadier, the tremors less frequent. Each subtle sign was a small victory. The team exchanged a few words, speaking only when necessary, mindful of the fragile balance between hope and loss. As evening approached, Dr. Mwangi whispered softly to Yusuf, "If he holds through the night, we may have a chance." The words were careful, measured, neither promise nor despair. The lion's eyes fluttered open briefly, meeting Yusuf's gaze with a faint flicker of recognition. In that quiet moment, man and beast shared a fragile connection forged through hardship and hope. The battle was far from over, but the first steps toward healing had begun. 2 weeks had passed in gentle quiet. The lion's breathing, once shallow and ragged, had deepened into a steady rhythm. The swollen wound near his hind leg had begun to close, scar tissue knitting slowly beneath the fur. Each day, the team brought fresh water and carefully measured food, their presence quiet but constant, never pushing, always patient. Yusuf watched from a distance, the weight of those days etched in the steady lines of his face. At dawn, the air was crisp and clear, the soft light spilling across the ridge like a pale promise. The lion stood taller now, muscles returning beneath his thickening coat. His steps were deliberate and even, no longer tentative or faltering. He moved with a grace that seemed to reclaim something lost, a quiet strength born of survival. Yusuf and the team were gathered near the edge of the clearing, ready but still, watching with quiet anticipation. The lion's amber eyes caught the first rays of sunlight as he stepped forward from the shadows. No hesitation, no pause. His head lifted high, nose twitching at the morning breeze. The infection that had once threatened to consume him was now a fading shadow. With each step, the lion passed closer to the rangers, their presence accepted without fear or resistance. He moved past Yusuf without a glance or stumble, a silent acknowledgement of the care that had sustained him. The team held their breath, watching the moment unfold. But just before the lion reached the edge of the tree line, the place where wildness waited beyond the clearing, he paused. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head and looked back toward the ridge, toward the faces that had stood with him through his darkest hours. His eyes held no words, only a quiet gratitude carried in that steady gaze. Yusuf met the look and nodded softly, lips parting in a whisper. "Go well." The lion gave a low, deep breath and then turned away, stepping into the cool shade of the trees. His tail flicked once, then settled as he disappeared into the brush. The morning filled with the sound of leaves shifting, birds beginning their songs, and the faint rustle of a life reclaimed. The team remained still, the weight of that moment settling like dust on their skin. No cheers, no words of triumph, just the steady beat of gratitude in their chests and the soft wind carrying the lion's departure. As the sun rose higher, casting long beams through the trees, Yusuf whispered to the empty air, "You found your way back." And in the quiet that followed, the ridge seemed to breathe again, holding that look, that trust, forever.